All right. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you all so much for bearing with us. Thank you so much for being patient. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Frantz. I'm a museum educator at the Intrepid Sea Air and Space Museum. Along with myself, I have my colleague Alicia. She's going to be in the chat. She's also going to be engaging with us as well throughout the program. Once again, thank you guys so much for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. We'd like to welcome you guys to our virtual Intrepid Adventure program today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your questions throughout the program, and hopefully we can try to address as many as we possibly can. Now, the museum live streams are all for free. And if you would like to support us in delivering this exciting content, we ask that you please click the link below in the description in order to donate and help out. Once again, my name is Frantz, and we're going to be getting started today with our program called Space Pudding. We're going to be talking about eating in outer space, ladies and gentlemen, everyone's favorite topic, right? So we'll start off by looking at this gentleman here. We can see kind of in the background there, you can see my friend there with something on a spoon kind of floating around, right? And that's kind of going to be the theme of today's program. We're going to be talking about how you can actually eat food in outer space and what are some of the important things you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about eating in space, right? So here we go. Now, when it comes to talking about the Intrepid, we first have to talk about why we talk about this, right? Well, the Intrepid was an aircraft carrier that was made back in 1943. It served in 3 wars, World War II, Vietnam, and the Cold War. In 1974, it was retired and no longer used for military service. And in 1982, we became the Intrepid Sea Air and Space Museum, right? So you can see on the left of this picture, that's Intrepid in service. That's Intrepid sailing the 7 seas. But on the right side, you can see Intrepid as it is today, as a museum in the Hudson River, right off the West Side Highway, right on 46th Street and 12th Avenue in New York City, right? Now, a lot of people come to the museum and they ask, why do you talk about space, right? You're a sea, air, and space museum. You're a sea museum. Obviously, we can see why, ladies and gentlemen, right? We have the ship going through the water. We're a air museum. We can also see why at the top of the ship here, you can see those planes, right? We're an air museum because of those planes. But the space part is the part that's very confusing, right? Now, let's talk about this now. How is the Intrepid connected to space? Well, you look here. This gentleman's name is Scott Carpenter. He is an astronaut, right? And Scott Carpenter had a very important job. You see, early on in the space program in this country, we broke everything up into missions, right? And the missions were broken up into 3 separate missions: the Gemini missions, the Mercury missions, the Gemini missions, and the Apollo missions, right? In that order. And these missions took American astronauts all the way to the moon, right? So the first set of missions were called the Mercury missions, and Scott Carpenter was one of these astronauts. Mr. Carpenter would have went up on top of a Redstone rocket. As you can see here, this is a capsule on top of a rocket here. And on May 24th of 1962, he went up into space, did 3 orbits around the Earth, splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean, and was picked up by the Intrepid. So you can see him right down there, the circled gentleman here is Mr. Carpenter being rescued by a helicopter. And that helicopter ends up landing on Intrepid's flight deck, right? So that's the reason why we are a space museum. The Intrepid is what's called a prime recovery vessel for NASA. Now, Scott Carpenter wasn't the only astronaut that got picked up by the Intrepid. As a matter of fact, this is the replica of the Mercury Aurora 7 capsule, right? You can kind of see the size of it, seeing that it only fits 1 astronaut inside of it. But the other capsule that the Intrepid got involved with picking up was this one. And this one was sent up in March of 1965. Virgil, Gus Grissom, and John Young during the mission Gemini 3. And this program was called Gemini because it would fit 2 astronauts inside of it, kind of nicknamed after the constellation of the twins, right? And you can see right up here at the tip of this Gemini Titan rocket, there is the capsule right on top of this thing that goes boom, right? There are these 2 astronauts right there in the middle. And then right here, you can see the capsule in the water waiting to be picked up. Right next to it is a ship with sailors looking out, and that is the Intrepid, right? So the Intrepid picked up this capsule and these astronauts after this space mission, right? Now, It's interesting thinking about these missions, right? These missions were to tell astronauts about what it was like in outer space. So there were some people who did the first of these things in space. And there was one individual, his name was Alan Shepard, right? There's Mr. Alan Shepard. He was in the Mercury missions as well. And he'd be at the tip of this rocket, right here on this Mercury Redstone rocket, going up into outer space. You can see him there in the spacesuit in the middle. Right on the right there, though, there's him getting picked up after his mission, right? His mission was a complete success. Now, one thing that I like to point out, though, is the way he's standing. Now, I know he's not doing this on purpose, but I just like to think that he is, based off of the story that I'm about to tell you guys right now. Now, you see, Mr. Alan Shepard, his mission was to go up into space and come right back down. That trip only takes you about 15 and a half minutes, right? And he had to use the bathroom. Why did he have to use the bathroom, you say? Well, before astronauts went up into outer space, NASA put them on a low residue diet. Take that for what you may. But a low residue diet pretty much means that it doesn't make you have to go to the bathroom. The story goes, Mr. Alan Shepard had a little too many liquids for breakfast. And so when he got inside of the capsule, he realized he had to use the bathroom. But he had to stay locked inside of his capsule for his mission, and he figured he could wait. That's not too long, 15 and a half minutes. But there were hour-long delays on the launch pad, and that left him locked inside of his capsule. So he really had to go eventually. So he then asked NASA if they could give him the thumbs up to use the bathroom inside of the spacesuit that he was wearing, and they did. They gave him the thumbs up. So I guess you can say the very first American to travel into outer space pretty much peed his pants before he left the launch pad. Now, if this wasn't that bad, NASA didn't want this to ever happen again. So astronauts started wearing diapers in outer space. So that's what astronauts wear. They don't call them diapers, though. They call them maximum absorbency garments, which is a fancy way of saying diapers, right? Now, this is important to think about because in thinking about eating before you go up into outer space for these short missions, they had to think about astronauts using the bathroom eventually, right? Just in case there were some times that you had to get locked inside of your capsule for an unknown number of hours, like Mr. Alan Shepard did, right? So that's why this stuff is important, right? Doing these missions and figuring out what we can do in outer space before we go up there, right? So are there any questions about those first missions, about the Gemini missions, about the Mercury missions? Any questions about those beginning missions and any of these funny antics that we talked about here? So how long was the Mercury 7 mission? So this mission that we're talking about is the mission that Scott Carpenter went on, and that's this capsule with this gentleman. This mission was only a couple of hours. I believe it was about 4.5 hours. He did a couple of orbits around the Earth after being up in outer space for a couple of hours, and then he splashed back down. So he wasn't in outer space for a terribly long time. As a matter of fact, when they sent him up into outer space, they knew he'd be up there for a couple of hours. So what they decided to do was give him America's the first American astronaut solid food. So it was the first solid food eaten in space was by Mr. Scott Carpenter up in outer space. So were all the Mercury and Gemini missions short? So that's a great question. No, they were not. See, these missions were some of the earlier missions in these particular parts of the program. And so the Mercury mission, he was only up in outer space for a couple of hours, right? But as time progressed, they needed to be in outer space for longer. So eventually they spent overnight in outer space and then 2 weeks in outer space. And the reason why they spent 2 weeks in outer space, usually during the Gemini missions and the later parts of the Gemini missions, were because this is going to be sort of the longest time that it would take you to get to the moon and back in preparation for the Apollo missions, right? So these missions had different lengths, but the ones that were closer to the beginning of the program, those missions were generally shorter. That's why this mission and the Gemini 3 missions were only a couple of hours. And maybe one more question. How do astronauts eat when they are in their spacesuits on spacewalks? That's a great question. So astronauts astronauts eventually, we'll talk about how things progress a little bit later, but astronauts, what they do is they have these pouches that they have in their suits that they actually can drink from. There's a drink pouch and a food pouch that they can eat liquid food, right? And this is important because sometimes you're on spacewalk for hours, right? And so in order to have nourishment, in order to have hydration, you have to have these things with straws that you can kind of use your mouth to drink because you can't use your hands, right? Great question. So let's move on a bit, because now that we're talking about food, now it's important to talk about why does food need to be specially prepared for space travel, right? Because I said it before, America's first solid meal in outer space, Mr. Carpenter ate. So why does food in general have to be specially prepared? You guys can let me know in the chat if you think you know the answer. But I'll give you guys a couple of reasons why. Well, some of the reasons why we're going to need to specially package our food and especially prepare it is because food used on space missions had to last a long time in certain cases. But not all storage solutions worked with space flight and with weight, with volume and packaging. And also early missions had concerns of lack of refrigeration, right? So all of this stuff is very important. You see, at the very tip of the rocket lies the capsule, and the fuel from the rocket is actually pushing up the capsule up into the sky. So you're going to need a lot of fuel just to push that tiny capsule into outer space. Now, every single pound of food, every single pound of water, every single pound of person that goes on the capsule is going to need to be accounted for by fuel sent up into outer space. So we can't just put any food that we want on the space capsule due to the fact that food adds weight, right? And we have to refrigerate some food, right? Some food develops bacteria if it's not frozen or not cold, right? Oh, another reason why eating in space is a little difficult that we got to think about is because of microgravity, right? Because of floating around, right? Things float around in outer space. As you can see, these individuals are kind of sleeping in a very interesting position, right? One individual is upside down, right? So this is something that was very important, right? Microgravity causes things to float around. Now, this is the reason why in earlier missions, this is what food used to look like. This is what space food kind of used to look like. If you look closely at what this says, it says beef and vegetables. This is not food that I think I would want to eat. It actually looks like paint or toothpaste coming that you squeeze out of a tube, right? And they had to eat this with a straw, right? Because of all of that stuff, right? Because of, you don't want all that stuff floating around, right? You don't want beef and vegetables floating around inside of your cabin. So they had to package all of this stuff in gelatin to keep it nice and packed together, nice and tight, right? Inside of these tubes that they would use straws to drink out of, right? They would also sometimes have to rehydrate their food. We'll talk about this a little bit later. But one thing I want to point out is this right here is beef pot roast. Yeah, soak that in, ladies and gentlemen. It kind of looks like beef jerky, but it's beef pot roast. Not too good. And you can see right here, this water gun would actually be put into here to inject water into it. Now, early on in these missions, the food was awful, as you can see here, right? But these astronauts did something they weren't supposed to do. Now, once again, this is John Young here on the left, and this is Gus Grissom on the right. I use this picture specifically because they look like they're in a lot of trouble. And the reason why they might look like they're in a lot of trouble, I'm not sure if that's actually when they took this picture, was because of the fact that they did something unthinkable. They snuck a corned beef sandwich on rye bread into outer space, which is a no-no, right? Now, the reason why it's a no-no is for all the reasons that we mentioned before: extra weight, bringing that up into outer space, we got to account for it. But it's also due to the fact that bread creates crumbs. And here on Earth, because of gravity, crumbs fall down to the ground. But in outer space, those crumbs are going to float around. They're going to get stuck inside of things, possibly like your eyes or your throat or even your ventilation system, which can stop you from coming back home safely, which isn't a good thing, right? So after they ate this sandwich in outer space, they got a good scolding they got yelled at for this. But who can blame them? Because who would want to eat this nasty beef pot roast? I'm sorry, guys, I can't get over this. But ladies and gentlemen, I just want to take a quick question break. If you guys have any questions Once again, feel free to type them in the chat. So let's see if there's any questions that we can see in the chat. I know that Intrepid, we are also asking people what type of food they would bring into outer space if they can bring food. And that's something that I would love to hear what you guys would bring. So if you guys would like to share some questions, you can. So how do astronauts get food and supplies when they need them? That's a great question. So if astronauts are in outer space for a long period of time, right? So for instance, the astronauts that went all the way to the moon, they actually had their food and supplies with them. And on the International Space Station, there's a ton of food. They store a ton of food on the International Space Station for these astronauts to eat. And that's because the astronauts are going to be in outer space for a long period of time. So they are actually packed. They have so many so much food inside of where they are. They have enough that they can survive their mission, right? But if any event that they need more supplies, we can actually send up a rocket, right? Send up a rocket like a Soyuz capsule, which is a capsule that is sent up by the Russian Space Agency into outer space. And we can pack supplies on that to go to the International Space Station just in case there needs to be some supplies sent up there, all right? I see some people said that they bring cotton candy and lollipops to outer space. Nice. So maybe we can get one more question. Maybe we get one more question on the screen here. Oh, and do astronauts get to pick their own food when they go into space? It's a really good question because since we're also talking about what we would bring into outer space. Now, originally, early on in the space missions and the space program, they could pick their food. It obviously had to be specially treated, and we'll talk about how we treated the food. But they could pick pretty much what they wanted to, and they would cater to the astronauts. As the mission started doing more and more missions and having more and more astronauts, they didn't want to do this too much anymore. So pretty much they had an a la carte menu when you had certain things that you could have, and you could pick from those things what you would eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. All right. Great question. So now we are actually going to jump back into learning a little bit more about space food. So how did space food change over time, right? And how did, making space food and eating space food change over time? Like, how did we go from, once again, this? I just can't. Just girls, let me know in the chat in the comments if you guys would like to eat this food, if you think it'd be tasty. But this to more solid looking food that looks kind of good to eat. Maybe you just have to add some water to it, right? To this, dinners on the International Space Station with pizza, actual pizza in outer space. So how do we get from point A all the way to point C, right? Well, all this stuff has to be specially treated. So let's talk a little bit about some of the food that goes up into outer space. So the intermediate moisture food, right? This is food that has some water in it, but some of the water is removed, right? And for example, this is like dried peaches, pears, and apricots, right? And this is important because if you want to eat fruit in outer space, if you want to enjoy fruit, you have to do one of two things. Either A, you can bring up whole fruit, but you have to promise NASA that you're going to eat that almost as soon as possible. The reason why is because fruit's going to rot pretty fast. You don't want rotting fruit on the International Space Station, right? So fruit, if it's whole fruit, you're going to eat it pretty quickly. If you want to have fruit for the long run, you're going to use fruit like this, right? Pretty much taking out water out of the fruit, and then also taking out air in this packaging to preserve it and keep it as fresh as long as possible, right? Next, we have rehydratable or freeze-dried food, right? And this is just food that water is removed from the food packaging, packaging. And this is for stuff like soups, casseroles, scrambled eggs, and breakfast cereals, right? So this is really important in terms of eating food that has a little bit more substance, right? Just adding more water to the food that's freeze-dried, right? Then you have natural form foods. These are foods that are more whole. So like granola bars, nuts, cookies, condiments, mustard, right? And these have naturally long shelf life. So they don't expire. It takes a long time for these things to expire. So they go up into outer space. So that way you can leave them up there for quite some time, right? One thing to note, though, that if you're eating the candy, like the M&Ms, or if you're eating those cookies and crackers and things like that, you want to make, not crackers, excuse me, but you're eating those cookies, you're going to make sure that you're quickly eating them in one bite, because you don't want crumbs. You want to eliminate as many crumbs as possible. Now, these are specially treated, so they don't crumble up as much as cookies here on Earth, but you still want to be safe and make sure you're okay. Next, you're going to irradiate food. Now, that sounds really, really bad, and I think NASA scientists knew this as well. The meat is actually packaged in foil pouches, and it's briefly exposed to radiation from gamma rays or electrical beams. And this actually allows the meat to not grow bacteria. So if you want to bring up meat, there's no refrigeration up on the International Space Station or in these capsules. So if you want to bring up meat, you have to bring it up in these special pouches that it's specially created. Right now, if you do want your food to be heated up, there's no real conventional oven. What you do is you just add some warm water to your food, for food that needs to be rehydrated. And food like meat, you put it in what's known as like a heat storage unit that kind of heats it up. It doesn't really have too much heat, conducting heat, because you don't want that on the International Space Station, right? And lastly, you have thermal stabilized foods, right? And these are foods that they use heat to destroy the bacteria and other organisms. So it can be stored at an ambient or a room temperature, and this is more usually in the form of canned fruits, meats, and fish. And this way, this stuff can be stored for quite some time. You don't have to worry about it going bad, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, we quickly went over eating things in outer space, right? So next, we're gonna play a little game. I call it to snack or not to snack, because that's the question, right? I'm going to show you guys some things, and I want you guys to let me know if this is something that you can eat, right? Something that you can snack on in outer space. Strawberries. Do you think you can eat strawberries in outer space? Let me know in the chat if you think you can eat strawberries. Now, it's very important to make sure that you keep yourself nourished. You can write yes or no, by the way, in the chat. It's important that you keep yourself nourished. So fruits and vegetables and different kind of arrays are very important to have. But do you think you can have strawberries? And how would you have to put them? How would you have to put them and use them in outer space? How would you have to store them? So I see an answer in the chat saying, no, there's no way that you can have strawberries in outer space. All right. So let's see what the answer is. Let's see if you can. And the answer is yes. Strawberries are going to be like these freeze-dried strawberries. Once again, we're going to take all of the, not all of it, but most of the water out, right? And we're kind of leave a little bit of a paste there, right? So that way when we reintroduce water to this, it kind of mixes up, right? And so that way we can eat this. So strawberries can be eaten in outer space. How about eggs? What about some nice breakfast? So a good breakfast meal. Do you guys think you can eat eggs? Be it scrambled, sunny side, eggs Benedict? You guys can let me know in the comments if you like eggs and how you like your eggs. It'd be kind of interesting to know. My eggs scrambled. But I see some folks saying, yes, you can. I see some folks saying, yes, you can. I see someone saying no. And actually, I think it's interesting. And the person that said no, Benedict's name, Eggs Benedict, is pretty funny. I see someone saying sunny side up. Awesome. So let's see. We can eat eggs in outer space, and it looks like that. I might pass, might skip on breakfast, might grab some granola on that one, right? Before I go out into outer space. So you can see at the top there, it says 3 ounces of hot water. So you're adding 3 ounces of hot water to that. And when they say hot water, they just mean kind of warm water, warmer than the cold water that you drink, right? Another thing I want to point out is this interesting sticker here. Everyone see the sticker here? The stickers are to denote whose food is who, right? So everybody on the International Space Station, for instance, or the space shuttle has these circles that they can put on their food. And these circles pretty much let you know whose food is who. And everyone has a certain amount of food. Now, depending on how big or small you are, your rations are basically separated accordingly. So if you're a really big person or a bigger person, you're gonna need a little bit more food, right? So you got a little bit more food than other people. Apparently, what some people would maybe do, this is the story that I heard, some people would actually sometimes switch those stickers. So if you had more asparagus than you had, say, another one of your favorite snacks like a brownie, sometimes people would switch a sticker here and there just so that way they can get a little extra ration, right? Question 3, how about a sandwich with meat and condiments? Do you guys think you can eat a sandwich? And I know we did just talk about the sandwich in outer space and eating the sandwich in outer space, but do you guys think that after time progressed, do you think maybe they figured out a way to eat sandwiches in outer space? Maybe. Maybe not like we're looking at here with sesame seeds and with lettuce, right? But we can enjoy a sandwich in outer space just by using tortilla. The reason why we can use tortilla is because tortilla doesn't break up like bread does, right? When we break up the tortilla, it kind of breaks up almost into whole pieces, right? But then also tortillas are placed in special pouches and packages that have all of the air taken out, right? And this allows that tortilla to not get moldy. And these tortillas can last about 18 months in outer space if they're in a package that's not open. So it's really, really important to have food, and really, really important to have food specifically that lasts for a long time in outer space in order for you to get more bang for your buck and more food to eat in outer space, right? You can actually see the cheese on it, which is pretty interesting here, right? Now, this last one may cause a bit of controversy. Oh, sorry, there's one more before the last one. Everyone's favorite shrimp cocktail. This is my favorite food. Whenever we have this at gatherings, you can see me with several shrimp in my mouth. So you guys can let me know if you guys think shrimp cocktail is used in outer space. Is it eaten in outer space? So I see some no's. Right? This seems like it might be too much, right? We have shrimp with the cocktail sauce. We have the whole glass, right? But let's see what it looks like in space, because you can eat it. And once again, it doesn't look like the best tasting thing, right? You have to add water to this. And you can actually see here, this is the cocktail sauce that's mixed into it. Now, cocktail sauce is pretty much just ketchup and horseradish, right? Horseradish is a very distinct taste. Now, this is very important because when astronauts go up into outer space, because there's no gravity really to pull like their liquids down in their bodies, sometimes the liquids get kind of stuck up in their face. When it gets stuck up in your face, you really don't want that feeling, right? It's kind of feeling like stuff, like if you have a cold, right? And when that happens, sometimes you can't taste much. And so these astronauts, they really like food like shrimp cocktail because of that horseradish sauce, right? That horseradish can really, really make you, you can really taste it, right? And when you eat the shrimp cocktail. So they like that because it has a very distinct taste. Things like chocolate and cocktail sauce and condiments, they really enjoyed because it tastes good, right? Some of the other food tastes really bad. And now, this is the one that everyone's waiting for. Ice cream. Let me know in the chat if you think they can eat ice cream in outer space. Now, the reason why I have to ask this, the reason why it's very important to ask this, is because I know some people may have experimented. Maybe they have tasted something. You guys can let me know in the chat if you got a hint of what I'm talking about, right? So some folks say yes. Some folks say yes, right? And when we think about ice cream in outer space, sometimes you might think about the freeze-dried, as my friend in the chat said. You might think of the freeze-dried ice cream, that dehydrated ice cream, right? You might think of the ice cream looking a little something like this, right? Broken up into 3 different parts, right? You got your strawberry, you got your vanilla, you got your chocolate, right? You got your freeze-dried ice cream that kind of looks like chalk. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to let you know that this was not eaten in space, and they do not eat this in outer space. For the main reason why they don't eat it is because they don't like it, right? They can actually eat regular ice cream in outer space. And if you actually think about ice cream here on Earth, although eating space ice cream is pretty funny and pretty fun, eating regular ice cream is a lot better, right? So they don't have to eat this ice cream in outer space. They eat regular ice cream. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, are there any questions? Any questions at all about the food that you can eat in outer space? Any questions? Where do NASA chefs get the food from before they freeze dry it? I heard someone say they grab stuff from the supermarket. Yes, some of the stuff they do grab from the supermarket. They grab stuff that has already been professionally packaged. And the reason why you can do this is because these things go through their own rating systems. So for instance, if you're going to have a thing of granola, right? This granola thing went through a whole bunch of things through the FDA, right, or Food and Drug Administration, and pretty much to say that it is okay for people to eat and that it won't go stale for as long as it says on the package, right? So these things they can actually buy from the supermarket. Other things, like some of this food that we've been talking about, it gets made by chefs, scientific chefs down in NASA for the astronauts to eat when they go up into space. Great question. Any other questions? Can they make their own food in space now? This is a very important question. They can make their own food to an extent, right? They can't make food like pizza like we make here on Earth, or make bread, or make dough, or make any of that stuff in space. As I said before, there's no oven, right? But they can grow different vegetables, and they have been growing vegetables. And this is very important for our next mission in outer space. NASA's next mission is to hopefully be able to send someone to Mars, and sending someone to Mars with the idea that maybe we can grow something on Mars for potential future, going to Mars more frequently, right? And so this is very important because we're going to be testing things called hydroponic planting. And hydroponic planting is pretty much when you take a plant and you put it in nutrient-dense water. Basically, you take water, you put all the good stuff that plants need that they normally get from soil in the water. And plants can pretty much grow in this water, even in outer space. So they've grown some small things. I believe tomatoes have been grown in outer space. I believe potatoes have also been grown in outer space. So they can grow some of their food, but most of the food that they do eat in outer space, they lettuce. I definitely know they made lettuce, but most of the food that they do make in outer space, or eat in outer space, has been brought up prior to them going into space. Great question. Any more? Are there any other? I see one. Oh. What's the longest someone's been in space for? That's a great question, especially thinking about how long you've been in outer space and how much food you need to survive. The longest time that someone's been in outer space is a Russian cosmonaut, which is another way to say astronaut. The Russian cosmonaut was up in outer space for over 460 days, right, which is over a year. So they had that much food in order to bring up into outer space that they could survive on the International Space Station for over a year. Great question. Can they make marshmallows? They can't make marshmallows, but I believe they can take marshmallows up into outer space if they want to enjoy it. I know there's a very famous astronaut who goes up into outer space, and when she went up into outer space, she brought up marshmallow fluff, to make fluffernutters sandwiches. So they can bring up marshmallows. I don't think they make them up there, though. And I think, are there any more? No? All right. So next, we're going to do something kind of fun. All right. I'm going to jump back to this. No to this ice cream, by the way, again. Right. Let's make some space pudding. All right. Because astronauts can eat pudding in outer space. And ladies and gentlemen, you can make space pudding at home. And I'm going to give you guys the things that you're going to need. You're going to need a sandwich bag, 3 tablespoons of dry pudding mix. You're going to need 4.5 tablespoons of powdered milk, and 6 tablespoons of water. All right. You're also going to need a tablespoon just to eat with, of course, and a paper towel just in case. Right. So let's check out this cool little setup that I have here. And we're going to jump around a bit here, sorry. And we are going to put that there. Cool. So this is something that I have just right next to me. And what I'm going to do is show you guys how to make space pudding. So once again, we have the powdered space pudding mix here. It's not actually real space pudding mix. It's actually just Oreo flavored, which I really enjoy. All right, so I made the Oreo ones, right? We have the dry milk here. We're going to put this inside of our Ziploc bag. And we also have some water here. And so what I'm going to do is put this here, just like that. And what we're going to do is just seal this up, and we're going to let all of the air out of the bag, because we want to do this kind of like a vacuum sealed bag, right? This is nice and sealed. And then we're going to smush it all together. And this is literally how they make the pudding when they go up into outer space. They take water, powdered milk, powdered pudding mix, and mix it together inside of the bag. Now, some food that they do put in, make in outer space, there's actually a time limit that you're supposed to wait for after you put the water in, just so that way the water gets the right amount of moisture. But for all intents and purposes, we're actually done here. So actually what we're going to do is jump back here, and we are going to take a look at me actually enjoying this. So let's switch this here. Here it is here. My pudding in all of its glory. And here's the taste test. You guys can let me know at home if you think this is going to taste good. Here we go. Well, that's pretty good. I think I have one of the best jobs in the world. I get to eat Oreo pudding while I talk about space, right? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have food in my mouth. If you guys have any questions about food and space, any questions about these missions and these astronauts as they eat, feel free to let us know in the chat. So let's have some questions, shall we? I can see my colleague asked who's making space pudding for dessert tonight. I think I might have to make another round of space pudding tonight. How many people have been to outer space? It's been a little over 500 people. I know the number was close to 550 around 2018, and we've had several people go up since then. So a little over 550 people have been in outer space since we started sending up people into outer space in the early 1960s. Any other questions? Any other questions about space food? Were all the Mercury and Gemini missions short? So no, they were not short. Some of them were a little bit longer, like the missions that we sent up, that we picked up. Those missions were the shorter ones. They were about 3 to 4 hours in outer space. But then when you got to the Apollo missions, those missions, for instance, the one that took us to set foot on the moon for the very first time, that actually, that mission took about 2 weeks. Why did NASA break the plan to get to the moon and into missions? So are there different missions? Why was there Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo? And the reason why was because it was almost like taking that first dip into the water, right? When you go to the pool, you put your toe in the water for a second, then you put it back out because it's too cold, right? But then you might put your foot a little bit longer in the water and then take it out. Then you might put your whole leg in the water and take it out. Then you might put both legs all the way up to your waist in the water, right? Then take it out. But then you're now getting more accustomed to it, right? So now you might be able to go all the way up to your neck into the water. And then you take your time and then you go underneath the water, right? So you take different steps and you get farther and farther each time. So for instance, the Mercury missions, these were pretty much like the infancy stages. This is where we're going to eat those plastic foods in pouches, right? This is where we're going to be only in outer space for short periods of time, maybe a day or so. The Gemini missions, that's going to be like the middle stage. That's when you're actually going to be meeting up with things in outer space in order to dock with it in outer space. It's actually where you're going to be doing different maneuvers in outer space and moving your spacecraft while in motion in outer space, right? So now we're actually learning how to move in outer space. It's also where we're going to do the first spacewalk, where we're going to leave outside of our capsule or whatever we're in outer space, and we're going to do work outside of the capsule. And then the Apollo missions eventually took all of the things that we learned in the first two programs and applied it to that mission in order to get the astronauts to the moon. All right, is there any other question? So I do see there is a question. Have there ever been short missions? And yes, there were very short missions. For instance, the very first American to go into outer space traveled in a Mercury capsule, and that mission, the whole entire mission took about 15 and a half minutes from when the rocket took off. He went into space and he came back down. So it didn't take too long. All right. All right. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you guys so much for joining us for this this space pudding program where we talked about eating in outer space. Thank you so much for sharing your comments and your questions. They're very much appreciated. The museum has introduced a number of new live streams programs, so please follow and subscribe to our channel on YouTube and on Facebook, and please come and subscribe to us on Facebook. So we'd love to have you guys come back and visit us on programs every Tuesday and Thursday at 3 p.m. for these virtual Intrepid adventure programs. If you guys like this program and you want to see these continue, please consider clicking the link down in the description and down below in order to consider donating. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we see you guys on Tuesday. All right. Bye, everyone.